Welcome to the Fuel Your Comeback podcast. I have a athlete story for you today. I'm here with Kat Zempolich, and she's going to tell us all about the hip stuff.
The
right,
hip
Kat?
stuff.
Can
Yeah.
you can you give us the rundown? What's the elevator?
The elevator story. Yes. So my name is Kat. I am a co-founder at Morgan's Message, and I played lacrosse at Duke University. It feels like back in the day, but I feel like some of the alums would roll their eyes and be like, no, you don't know what back in the day is.
What's back in the day? What's back in the day?
I graduated from Duke in 2018. So
Okay.
kind of crazy.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm rolling my eyes at you.
Yeah, everyone's rolling their eyes at me. It feels like back in the day based on how like I think about things I do day to day versus like I was able to do when I was 20, and I'm like, holy shit, I shouldn't have. Oh, can I curse on this?
You can swear.
Okay?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, don't
worry. I just can't believe I ever kind of like took for granted, but that's another story. I was a recruited walk-on at Duke and loved playing lacrosse, knew I wanted to play it at the next level, got there and was totally kind of blown apart by how different the game was at the college level versus at high school. It was so much faster. The girls were, I don't want to say bigger, but they were stronger, you know what I mean? And more mature in their bodies and in terms of how they played, and just everything was so different. Freshman year was amazing, a lot of learning curves. We went to the Final Four. The team that year was really special, and I felt really, really lucky to have been given the opportunity to play. And I had kind of come in thinking that I wasn't going to play, but things weren't going to be as hard as they were. So my mindset going into sophomore year was like, I wanted to at least be a contender. I may not touch the field, but I wanted to be someone in practice that could make good plays, could like improve my teammates' game, all of that type of stuff. So I worked really hard over the summer, got in incredible shape, got there, kind of felt like, okay, this could be, something. Again, not going to play. There were some disappointing moments in fall ball where in practice I'd been in a lot of reps, but didn't touch the field in fall ball. And ultimately in like October, I started getting a nagging feeling in my, it's been so long now, my left hip.
Maybe it is back in the day. We can't remember which one it is anymore.
Yeah, it was my left hip. My left hip. And like kind of throughout the fall, did rehab, tried to like limit some of the reps. I was playing defense at the time, so you're in like a pinching motion most of the plays, right? Like think about hinging forward, squatting down. Didn't feel great. In November, which is like our workout time, it's like 8 hours a week. You're not really practicing. That was really focused on rehab. The goal was avoid surgery, rehab it, see if I can get through the season. And if I do need surgery, do it in the summer so that I wouldn't miss playing. Ultimately, it was so painful living with the hip injury. I don't think I didn't realize, I thought the worst thing that could happen to someone was tearing their ACL. I didn't realize that.
There's a lot of people listening to this that might be like, wait, that's not the worst thing that can happen?
I mean, no, sorry. No. Yeah.
It's true, though. It's true. Yeah.
Like my fear, watching teammates tear it was like, that's what's going to end my career. That's what's going to take me out of contention. And when I got the hip injury, it all put it into perspective of like, there's always something else. Right. And with the hip, it was a genetic disposition. I had what's called a cam impingement. And so every time that my knee went into flexion at 90 degrees, there was overgrowth, which ultimately the overgrowth of bone on my hip joint would hit my femur, or would try to at least, and then ended up ripping through my labrum, which sounds very painful. Don't know when it got torn, but ultimately I felt the pain of it. So like I say that to say there, and I'm going to butcher this stat, so you'll have to go back in and maybe correct me. It's something like 70% of female athletes or females have a torn labrum, but then 20% or something really lower ever has actual issues with it in terms of like pain. Like that's how common it is. But when it comes to like the pain and the everyday, it's a little bit lower.
I'm going to throw a side note in here, and then I have a question for you. I was just listening to a podcast yesterday with a doctor talking about imaging, and that exactly. He's like, I wish we did fewer MRIs because one, or the imaging, whatever the diagnostic imaging is, it's either going to tell us something that we already probably know is there, or it's like, 70%, again, I'll check these numbers, but 70% of female athletes have this torn labrum of some kind, but the majority aren't feeling it. So if you then do imaging and know it's there, how is that going to affect the athlete? Do we then fix a problem that we didn't know was a problem if they weren't feeling it at all, right? Or do we create this mental block of, well, it's just a matter of time, or like, at some point I'm going to start feeling pain. It was a really interesting concept that I'll link the episode I listened to in the notes. But I think there's a lot of athletes walking around with little things that they don't even know are there, and that's okay.
Yeah. And it's actually funny, not funny, but I had a friend who, and I'll loop this background, but I had a friend who played collegiate lacrosse at Delaware, and he had knee surgery after knee surgery after knee surgery. And I would see him over the summers. I would see him at winter breaks, and he'd be like, yeah, I'm out again with another knee surgery. It took them like a year and a half to realize it was his hips, which is crazy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was actually like they were looking in the wrong spot. So all that to say, I didn't realize how like your hips do everything for you. Laying down was painful, standing up was painful, sitting was awful. And all that led to was I was in preseason. I really wanted to push through, and I was standing in the dorm room showering, and my hip gave out on me, and I hit the floor, and I had to like grab my towel and crawl across the like dorm to have my roommate help me stand up. And I remember thinking like, this isn't it. I can't live life like this. And that was when I decided to get the surgery, which I got the surgery, and my one regret was my mentality going into it. And part of that, sorry.
No, I was going to say, can I pause you there? Because I have so many questions about leading up to the surgery, and then we'll loop back around to the surgery. Because you mentioned, you were a walk-on. You got this click in your mind one day of like, I want to play. I'm going to push it and see how far I can get. When you think, and yes, this was a genetic predisposition that you're talking about, this injury. And also, big asterisk disclaimer here, shit happens. Right? We can go back and think about the stuff leading up to the injury and what could we have done different. But my question kind of is thinking about how you ramped things up to be like, I'm going to play. I'm going to see what I can do. Is there anything that you would want to go back and tell yourself, like, would I have wanted to, like, what do you know now that you maybe would have told yourself then?
Honestly, the only thing would have been just my like general mentality, I think, when it came to lacrosse. Like, but the other thing I would say is I had a mentality of like imposter syndrome, and it felt like I never, quite belonged when it came to lacrosse, which is so fascinating. I also played field hockey, and I never once felt like I wasn't like good at field hockey or deserved to be somewhere. Lacrosse I picked up a little bit later, and like recruiting was hard for lacrosse, whatever, all those things. But I kind of got to school, and I had this like, I'm a walk-on. And I remember one of my teammates later on down the road, when I was maybe a junior, had a comment about, one of the other walk-ons on the team, who I was the only one in my grade, and kind of said, well, they're a walk-on, like they're not expected to be, good. And I remember looking at her and being like, but I'm a walk-on. Yeah. And she looked me in the eyes, and she was like, oh no, I don't see you as a walk-on. Like, you're good enough to hang. Like, you could have played anywhere else. And I just remember thinking, okay, so there is a clear distinction, which I don't like hold it against her by any means. Like, I do think there's, right, it's like you're told something from when you're young of like, you're going to get a scholarship, you're going to go to school, like yada yada. But I was like, okay, so like there is a distinction, right, of like people who have a spot on the team versus who have like walked onto a spot on the team. And that only fueled that imposter syndrome of like, oh shit, she might think, because she said something right, like she genuinely believes I belong here, but like other people don't. whatever. So that
So,
would be my only thing I would go back and like say during that time.
which like is impossible because I literally was just working with our Olympic volleyball teams. I got to, kind of experience that with them this summer. And it happens at every level. There were girls who are like, "Yeah, I'm invited to go to Paris as a practice player though." So like, ugh. Or, "Yeah, I made the team, but I'm an alternate." Or like, "Yeah, I made the team, but I didn't play." Or,
Yeah.
"I made the team, but I didn't start." Or, "I made the team, but I lost my starting spot." And it's like it's at every single level
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. So that's the one thing. I think like my mindset probably held me back a little bit. But I don't know. Like
Yeah,
you see a lot clearly once you're out of it, I
for
think.
sure. For sure. Okay, so then let's return back to surgery. You were saying that you wish, again, maybe mindset is like the theme of this episode. You wish mindset had been a little bit different going into surgery.
Yeah, so we had, and again, maybe this speaks right to like my like imposter syndrome. We had an older girl on the team who she was an incredible player. She had torn her labrum the year before. She had torn it the year before, so my freshman year she had redshirted and she was out with the injury, and she had almost viewed it as like a death sentence. And when I tore it, I remember she was so supportive, but like she was crying. She was like, "I'm so sorry. This like act like this was the worst
Yeah.
thing that could have happened to you." And oh my God, I'm so sorry. It's going to be really hard. Like, and I remember that set the tone in my mind of like, oh, like this is going to suck. And even though someone else did say to me, like, don't let what she said kind of stick in your mind. Like you know, it was really hard for her, but there were other things going on and like yada yada. But I remember that stuck in my head of like, this is going to be hard.
Yeah.
And I was like, shoot, okay. Cause this was the first injury I like had broke my wrist. I'd done like random things here and there, but nothing that had ever taken me out for an extended
Yeah.
period of time or put me under anesthesia. So going in, I was like, oh, this is going to be really hard and difficult, and it's going to be isolating from my other teammates. And I had gone in pretty much paving the path that I
Yeah.
thought I was gonna take, and I what's it called? It's like self-fulfilled
Self-fulfilling
prophecies.
prophecy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I essentially made life, I think, a lot more miserable and a lot more harder than it needed to be.
Which, in your defense, is so normal. I
Oh,
mean,
100%.
last
Yeah.
year there was this huge thing going around of we need to figure out how, again, let's talk about ACLs, right? You were like, oh, I thought that was going to be my career ending injury. I was scared of the ACL happening because we have seen it happen to others, but also the media, their headlines are so dramatic. It's like the ACL epidemic in women's soccer, the blah, 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 blah. We have created this huge cloud of fear around it. So when it happens to a player, they're like, oh, well, I'm just one of the numbers now. I'm blah, 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 blah. I'll
Mm-hmm.
never be the same. And the reality is that self-fulfilling prophecy could look a lot different.
Yeah.
And it is different for a lot of people. They come back and they're better and they've learned so much in that rehab. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know how
No,
we change that
no,
other
it's
than talking about it.
I know, no, and it's a great point. And I'll even say, like, I'll skip ahead a little bit. I went home over the summer, my hip was fine, and then one day it started being painful again. And something didn't feel right. I went back to school. I was kind of half in, half out. I couldn't make it through a full practice. I was like, something is not right. Everyone was like, oh, it's scar tissue. It's, you know, it's this, it's that, which like in their defense, your body's relearning things. Your body's like kind of brand new in a sense. Like my hip was like shaved down, there were screws in it, my body was adjusting. Something though didn't feel right. And I finally kind of was like, no, like I really like shut me up by doing an arthrogram, like shut me up by putting me in the MRI because like something is not right. And we went in for the MRI and I came out and my surgeon was like, yeah, no, like we need to go back in. Yeah, it was like retorn. They thought it was going to be a 90-minute surgery. It ended up being like a 4-hour surgery. My mom was like, is my child dead? She was like sitting in the waiting
Oh,
room. She's like, why is this taking so long? It was supposed to be a cleanup. The screws had come out of, they hadn't healed properly. Some cartilage was like deteriorated. It was like a mess.
oh my
And,
gosh.
but I had gone in, I say that to say, I had gone into the second surgery being like, I am going to have a positive attitude about this, because like this at the end of the day is my hip. And when I say that, I mean like this isn't the next year and a half of playing lacrosse. Like this is carrying kids to and from a playground. This is sitting at an office desk. This is working out after. Like this is my life. I need these hips. I don't want to be like 40 years old getting a hip replacement. So I kind of went in being like, all right, this sucks, but you know what the bright side is like they're going to get it right this time. And I'm going to be able to walk without pain. I'm going to be able to go like sit at a high top bar with my friends without pain.
Yeah.
And I won't, I'm not going to wake up in the middle of the night. And that mindset shift was so different that like
Yeah.
that surgery, I mean, I had a few like mental health issues after it. But in terms of like my body healing, it was night and day to like the
Yeah.
first one.
To not to clarify, but to like really put almost a label on it, that's body image work. Like when I talk about injuries are such a good opportunity to work on body image, it's like, yeah, especially as females, especially as college females, we think of, how large or small our bodies are, like how comfortable or how, pretty or whatever we feel. But you also gaining acceptance of like, this is my body, this is my life. I'm going to choose to feel neutral about it and not gloom and doom, or I'm going to choose to feel XYZ about it. And that, like, almost lifting some weight off your shoulders the second time around, that is body image work in action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I will say I did veer a little bit, maybe like to the other side with food. We can dive into this. I like when I met back with my surgeon before the surgery, it wasn't like, oh, we could have done this, and this better. It was like, oh, maybe it's the things you're eating. Like gluten is a big inflammatory. You should get tested for like gluten intolerance, yada, yada. Instead of getting tested, I just was like, okay, I'll work with my nutritionist on like what's inflammatory or not. And we'll kind of like that I want to heal the right, like my intention was I want to heal, I want to come back, I want to finish my senior year
Yep.
strong. And to do that, I need to fuel my body the correct way. Like my intention going into it was not to lose 20 pounds. Well, they also were like, I will say caveat this of like, I was told, right, like every pound is like actually 8 pounds on
Yeah.
your hips, whatever. So that kind of sunk in my head a little bit, but it wasn't ever about the weight necessarily. It was, I want to feel strong and I really want to feel healthy. And that, like, when season comes around, fall ball comes around, I am doing like non contact stuff and feeling good about my body. That kind of spiraled into like a little bit of like the control. I couldn't control my body necessarily through other than rehab. And that spiraled a little bit to like, I think what is it, orthorexia, where I was like almost hyper fixated on eating like a certain amount of protein and a certain amount of this and a certain amount of that. And, you know, that,
Yeah. Because it's the thing that you can control,
yeah, it
right?
makes
And that's,
complete sense.
yep, that's very common, very normal. And also, it's very common to be like a pendulum, right? To be way over here and then swing all the way to the other side. And then that leads to some other stuff. So then we got to like find
Yeah.
that middle ground, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And that was very interesting. I mean, I luckily like was able to kind of pull myself away from it. I think after the summer, once everyone was back on campus, and I was like, oh, this is not
Yeah.
normal. This is like beyond. But there were some comments, right, of like, oh, you look amazing, or oh, this, or oh, that. And I remember that feeding into it a little bit. But ultimately, I was like, this is bananas that I'm like, why am I so fixated on, you know, this chicken? Like, I'm like, there's life
Yeah.
going on outside, which, yeah.
So the comments that you were getting about your looks or people noticing that change, was that fueling it or what pulled you out of it?
I think at first I was like, oh, I kind of like this attention. And then I was like, wait, I don't want to get attention for like how my body looks. I want to be getting attention for how I'm playing.
Mm-hmm.
And I also realized like I would be at the dining hall and I wouldn't be ordering the things I necessarily wanted to be ordering. I'd be like, oh, it has to have this, this, and this. And it got to the point where I was like, holy shit, Kat, like, what are we doing here? And it wasn't necessarily a friend or anyone who like said anything. It was more so me being like, no, I like want the chicken tenders. Like, why am I ordering like broth? Like, I was like, this, this seems like kind of silly. Like, let's chill out a little bit. And if, I start feeling like crap and I'm feeling like, let's see how my body reacts. And if those things aren't happening and I'm eating, a sandwich or whatever, it's fine. Um,
which is a great thing to do. Like, you became an observer of the actual, almost like data that your body can give you of like, okay, if I start eating, X, Y, and Z, do I notice more soreness, less soreness? Do I notice I'm feeling faster? Do I notice like the weight room is a little bit easier? I'm paying attention in class better. And when you start to pay attention to those things and you like make that shift into whether it's, including more foods or whatever that looks like, it's like, oh, wait, this is actually the better option.
Yeah, exactly. So that was, and I wouldn't say it was like I have a problem, I need to fix it, like get all the help I need. It was more so like, Kat, like, you got, like, what are we doing?
It's
like
one of those like, this is my life moments, right? Just like you had with your hip of like, this is my hip. I gotta figure it out. This is whatever. Same thing with food. It's like, this is my, holidays with my family. I don't want to be missing out on those meals, or this is my, social time with my team and stuff like that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what advice would you maybe give to someone who might be going through this right now?
Going through
an injury. I mean, a lot of times a lot of the things that you shared of feeling that pressure to like play at a higher level, or suddenly the majority of athletes that come work with me are on their second time around because they're like, okay, I'm going to do things a little bit different, right?
Yeah.
So suddenly trying to focus on food, or suddenly feeling whatever XYZ in their body, going through an injury in general.
Yeah.
What would you tell them?
I think there's two things, and really it's like what I would tell myself. And like, one is take it day by day by like listening to your body and really aligning with like what feels authentic and good to you. Of like, don't worry about the deadlines. They're all arbitrary anyway. Like, don't get pinned down to the I'm gonna get off crutches in 3 weeks and I'm gonna be not non-weight bearing for 5, because when those things aren't on that timeline, that tends to like send you into a spiral of like, oh, are things not progressing the way they should be? Versus, I think
like, when the PT or whoever is like, this is 6 to 9 months, stop expecting it to be 6 months, right? It might be 9. I see that so often of like, oh, my surgeon told me it'll be 9 to 12 months, so I'm thinking I'll be back in like 8.5. And I'm like, that's not
like, no, that's not how math
here.
works. Yeah. So I think it's like, take it day by day. Don't worry about like you needing to fit in a certain timeline or box because you think that's like what it should look like. Like, take the time to come back on your own timeline. Because I think like when people push themselves, it ends up like, I hate to say it, but you end up like going back into a different type of injury. Or sometimes your body, I think, will like slow you down to be like, no, we're not ready for that. And that's a pain in the ass. So I would say take it day by day. And then the second thing I would say is maybe this pairs in that category, but like, have some grace and empathy with yourself. Of like, your normal routine is not going to look like your normal routine. You are going to feel like an alien in your own body, and almost embrace the uniqueness of the situation and try to see like what you can get out of it. For example, for me, I found that I really liked the opportunity to be on the sidelines and help coach my teammates in terms of like, what was I seeing on the field from my vantage point that I wasn't seeing being next in line, right? Like, how do the dots connect? Who's good at what and who's not? Because when I came back, even though I was in and out, I kind of knew like the strengths and weaknesses of my teammates. And I knew like the broader concepts. And I had always had like a pretty good IQ, but I really felt like it opened me up to really understand and see the game in a different vantage point. And so maybe that's, not what someone who's listening to this, they feel like they have that down. Great. Like, how can you be a better teammate? Like,
Yeah,
how can
no,
you, right?
exactly.
Like, it's like pick something that you can do and put your energy into that you might not normally be able to do when you're able-bodied and on the
Yeah.
field doing
Yeah.
things.
So not only is that a way for you to be, connected to your team at such a weird time where you feel really disconnected to your team, but that's also how you come back a better player than you left. Because,
100%.
things that you want to get better at might not be accessible to you, but the IQ of the game or whatever, working on your sleep habits or working on your
Yeah,
nutrition or working like just learning more about your body, that's how you come back as a better player.
100%. Yeah.
That's great. I love that advice. I love that advice. So then let's switch gears into tell us about Morgan's Message.
Morgan's Message is a nonprofit that was founded in July 2020 to honor Morgan Rogers, who was one of my teammates at Duke and also a close friend who died by suicide in July of 2019. And Morgan was also, we got close, truthfully, like through our injuries. We were injured. My second time was her like first injury. She torn her ACL. And like we both had struggled with our mental health. We were from like nearby and had a ton of mutual friends back at home. She really was like such a bright light, but struggled a lot with her mental health and ultimately like wasn't able to raise a hand and get help. And so that's where Morgan's Message was created, to try to provide a platform for other student athletes who may be struggling with their mental health, who don't know how to ask for help or don't know how to sort through the types of emotions and things that they're feeling, and to provide like a safe space for people to come and talk about it. We found that, like I found at least, going to a school like Duke was such an
Mm.
incredible opportunity. And we have like one of the best law schools, medical schools, business schools, our endowments, right? Like we have all this money, we have all these resources. We did not have a psychiatrist on staff. We had an incredible sports psychologist who was awesome, but not a psychiatrist. No one really checking in on the mental side. We had all of the PTs, all of the athletic trainers, and I felt like if a school like Duke didn't, and now they do, but if a school like Duke didn't have a psychiatrist or didn't have someone supporting their student athletes' mental health, like, dear Lord, what does it look like at other schools? It felt like when I graduated, we really missed the mark on a ton of things. And that to me kind of stood out as like, if a school like Duke is missing the mark, there's
And every
gaps.
school is missing the mark. Yeah,
Every school is
basically.
missing the marks, and there's a lot of gaps in knowledge across the country, across universities, colleges. So that was part of the reason, was like, if the schools aren't going to provide, whether they can or can't via financials, or they do or don't want to, we can find a way to support these student athletes outside of the institutions. It's been really cool to be a part of it.
Yeah. For athletes listening that want to be involved, how can they get involved?
Great question. We have an ambassador program, which is for collegiate and high school student athletes. You can apply online, morgansmessage.org. You can hit ambassadors. We also have at large ambassadors, which is really anyone who's like out of college, can be non-student athlete, can be a parent, can be just like someone who's passionate about, mental health. And what those ambassadors do is really try to cultivate a community, like for Morgan's Message within their own community, that chats about mental health. The podcast that I oversee, the Mental Matchup, tries to provide anyone the opportunity to share their story, share their knowledge, share whatever they feel passionate about as it relates to mental health, student athletes. And the way you can go about that route is still morgansmessage.org, click on the mental matchup. Yeah, I think that covers
And
it.
and buy the merch. I have a mental matchup sweatshirt. I wear it. I'm not wearing it right now because it's like
It's
85
so
degrees in California.
comfortable.
It's so comfortable. I wear it all the time, and people stop me to ask me about it all the time. They're like, "That's a cool butterfly logo. Like, what is this?" I was like, "Oh, it's this really great nonprofit, blah, blah, blah." It starts conversations at the grocery store all the time. It's great. Yeah. And then maybe last thing for sports medicine professionals that are listening, either, dietitians, physical therapists, strength coaches, athletic trainers, a lot of times, yeah, there are not any sort of psych services. And especially like athletic trainers, they are is put on their shoulders of like not letting people fall through the cracks. What do you want them to know? What do you want them to look out for?
I was really lucky. My athletic trainer, my PT were like the best of the best.
Yeah.
And
Most
I
of them
think,
are,
yeah,
and
I
they're
feel like,
great. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I feel like the only one that I ever was like, huh, he was a little rough around the edges, but he had such a good heart. You know what I mean? I would say the thing that made the difference with them was they would always ask me how I was doing. And if I had like tears in my eyes, they'd like pull me aside and they'd be like, do you want to talk about it?
Mhm.
And like, sometimes like I would cry on the PT table and they were fine with that. They'd
Yeah.
like go about their business. They'd let me cry. They'd let me like feel the emotions. They made me feel like I wasn't just another hip or just another, injury that they were trying to get back on the field. Like they truly cultivated a relationship with me while I was on that table. And then when I was doing PT exercises, they would be working with another student athlete. They'd be like, Kat, how are you doing? How's it feel? Okay, cool. Let me know if you need anything. Like the little check-ins. And I think also my athletic trainer, it was very small, but she would let me like do waters with her. Like she'd be like, "Oh, I really need help. Can you help me fill up the waters?" She didn't
Yeah.
need my freaking help, but like
Yeah.
whenever I'd be like isolated or by my own, she'd be like, "Hey, come help me with this," or "Kat, can you grab this for me?" or "Can you do that?" And it was like the littlest of things, but it made all the difference of making me feel like I had a role and making me feel like I had something outside of like just doing my PT exercises or like cheering on the sidelines or even like coaching. Because in the early days on the crutches, you'd be like sitting on a chair or like in the gaiter and you wouldn't be able to be like mobile.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so hopefully there's something in there that they could take from.
Yeah. Most of them were probably listening, thinking like, okay, just keep doing what I'm doing. Great. That's
Yeah,
really validating, which is
perfect.
great, which is
Yeah.
perfect. Perfect. And then last but not least, it is currently September, which is Suicide Awareness Month. Any resources or things that you want to share about that?
Oh, resources or things I want to share.
What is that? And I can look this up actually. What is that suicide prevention number that you can
988.
call?
Yeah,
988.
988, which
Okay.
is incredible. I think the biggest thing is like if anyone listening to this is struggling, know that you're not alone. It's super cliche. I roll my eyes at myself all the time, but genuinely, you're not. Like you're not on an island by yourself. Hate to say it, you're not special. This isn't like a unique experience, and I say that because I think the sooner we realize that you're not the only one who has gone through this or who is going through this, the easier it becomes to reach out and ask for help. And then I'd also say be a little bit kinder in your day to day. I think like a smile can go a long way, a holding the door, a hey, how are you, and asking follow up questions rather than like, hey, what's up? Hey, what's up? Like going a little bit deeper of forming those human connections. Cause I think at the end of the day, like
Yeah.
that's what makes the biggest difference.
Put your phone down and talk to each other during lunch.
Oh my God,
You know?
bananas,
Yeah.
these screenagers, everyone has their phone. My fiance is like literally always in his group chat. I'm like, hello, like we're watching a movie here. Like, put
I know,
your
I was gonna
freaking
say
phone
it's not
down.
even just teenagers. Like
It's
I have
everyone.
tried so hard to implement a rule when I go home. I know I live, 3,000 miles away from my family, and when I go home, I'm like, can we have a no cell phone dinner? Like I see you twice a year. Let's put our phones down. And they do. Obviously, my family is great, but like that
And
was a rule that I had to ask for.
And hand up, like I'm at fault for it too.
For
Sometimes
sure. Same. Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
like a big Kindle reader, and I'm always like reading on my phone. I can't put my phone down because of that, but I'm like trying, right? I think it's really easy to be like sucked in to the black box. But yeah, I'm like,
yeah.
connect with people, make eye
Connect.
contact. It's not that
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah. Do a little something, something. And also, I'll extend that to yourself as well. Like, just be a little kinder to yourself. So many people are so kind to their friends and just absolute assholes in
Oh,
their
they're
own head.
brutal. Yeah, I do.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's okay to like give yourself some slack. It's actually encouraged.
Totally. Yeah, that's actually, it's funny you say that. That's something that I've been really trying to work on the past, like, I'll say few years, but uh, in particular, like, I've been going through a lot of life changes. And something, I forget who said it to me, but something someone said to me was like, you're the only person that knows you. Like, you're the only person you really have at the end of the day, which seems a little counterintuitive to what I've said, but I'll make it make sense. Like, you're born, right? You grow up, like, you should be your own best friend. Like, you should be the one boosting yourself up, because if you're not going to bet on you and if you're not going to support yourself, why should anyone else look to invest in you? Like, why should, right? And when we tear ourselves down expecting other people to like build us back up, if that other person who's building us up leaves, everything comes crumbling. So the
Yeah.
foundation needs to be laid from within. And I think that's like very important.
Yeah, I'm laughing because this is so nerdy, but my high school yearbook, like senior quote, was you have to spend 100% of your time with yourself, so you might as well enjoy the company.
There you go. You're speaking my language. I love that. I need that like up on my wall somewhere.
Yeah. And like if you don't feel like that right now, and I'm not talking to you directly, but fake it till you make it. Just,
Yeah.
you'll get there. Put those little post-its on your mirror every morning of like,
The affirmations, they
you're
work.
doing great.
Let
They
me tell
really
you,
do work.
they work.
Cognitive therapy, man, it's great.
It is great.
All right, all right. Well, we'll wrap there, Kat. Thank you so much. Tell our listeners where they can find you.
Where can they find me? Honestly, I'm off the grid.
Where can they find the mental
They
matchup
can. I
and
was going to follow up with, yeah. They can find the mental matchup at the mental matchup on Instagram. You can also find Morgan's Message on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter at Morgan's Message, and yeah, you can't find me because I am incognito, off the grid, due to just trying to create
life? Yeah.
boundaries and
Yeah.
support my own mental health. But
Good for
yeah,
you. Good for you. We love that. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story.
thank you for having me.